nothing else, for the sake of our children and children's children, it is time for society to unleash war on the Tories. This, to clarify, will not be a war of aggression. It will be a war against their aggression on the part of those who understand that collectivism, not individualism, is what separates us from the abyss of barbarism.
As the economic slump takes its toll, the gap between rich and poor is widening. Many families are struggling to stay afloat, living hand to mouth and excluded from modern life.
Living here is like being behind bars because you're only allowed to go out in certain times.
I'm not living, I'm surviving. I'm surviving on, it's like rationing on food, rationing on electric and gas. It's not a life at all.
The scary thing about it all really is it's hard to see a future. It's hard to see anything beyond what's here now.
But what is the true scale of poverty in Britain today, and what exactly do we mean by being poor? A study funded by the Economic and Social Research Council has set out to answer those questions in what they say is the largest survey ever conducted into living standards in the UK. Tonight has had exclusive access to that survey.
This survey doesn't just look at the incomes people have and what they spend their money on, like government surveys do. It also looks at the way they live, their actual living conditions, what they can afford and what they cannot afford.
It's the latest in a series of reports looking at living standards and spanning 30 years. The first, in 1983, was the subject of an ITV documentary.
In the 1980s, virtually no one dies of starvation in Britain. But there are those for whom poverty remains a matter of life and death.
So has the nature of poverty changed in the last 30 years, and if so, how? To find out, researchers asked 1,500 people from a cross-section of society what they considered necessities. Not surprisingly, more people now say owning a computer with internet access and a mobile phone is essential. But a warm, damp-free home and enough food for your family remain the basics almost everyone agrees no one should have to go without.
What we're talking about is not people going without luxuries, but without the basic necessities. The ability to feed themselves and their children, going without adequate clothing, a warm coat in winter, or shoes that fit their children's feet.
Researchers drew up a list of items that most people in their 1,500 sample considered necessities. Using this list as the benchmark, the study then looked at the living standards of more than 12,000 people. Anyone who couldn't afford 3 necessities was deemed to be living in poverty. The report's authors say their findings are shocking and that more people are living in poverty today than they were 30 years ago. They conclude that the unemployed, the sick and disabled and the elderly make up a substantial proportion of the poor. But the working poor, families with children and in low-paid jobs were among the hardest hit. The impact on children is a particular focus of the report.
In the poorest families, they've got £12 a day per person to live on. That's to pay for their heating, that's to pay for travel, that's to pay for food, that's to pay for something like electricity, gas, for the television. Never mind, there's nothing to do with trips or a social life. £12 a day, that's the reality of child poverty in Britain.
The Living Standards report finds that 4 million children are living in deprivation. Children like Tyrone.
I don't want to bring my friends here because it will be embarrassing because the state of the house.
It suggests 1.4 million children in Britain live in homes that aren't adequately heated. 600,000 live in overcrowded conditions. And 2.5 million live in homes that are damp. Tyrone shares a small, damp council flat with his mum Renee, 2 sisters Charisse and Zanisha, brother Javan and grandma Edith.
The damp in this room is right in the corner of the room, and there's damp at the sides and on the windowsills.
The council has now treated the damp in 2 of the bedrooms, but the 3rd bedroom, Tyrone's, remains in poor condition.
Water runs in here because it's not sealed properly, and damp builds up on the sides and the corners, and it's worse in that corner.
The damp has penetrated beds, furniture and clothing, rendering it useless. 2 of the bedrooms are now out of use.
I had to throw out all the furniture, and so at the moment there's no beds in the flat, there's no wardrobes in the children's room.
This is my mum's bed, but it got mouldy, so we can't sleep on it anymore.
Having too few beds leaves the 3 generations living in just 2 rooms. Their belongings are piled in every corner of the lounge. Renee sleeps on the sofa, her daughter's on the floor, and the boys share a room and a bed with their grandma.
I sleep on the far end here, and my grandma sleeps here. Most of the time it's cold because the radiator doesn't work well sometimes. Damp is creeping its way around the room from that corner.
There are so many children living such a grim existence, and that we don't see it. And actually our attitudes to this have hardened. This is a wake-up call. This report is a wake-up call, and I want people to see what Bernardo sees every day, which is the relentless grinding down of people by poverty.
The study says that attitudes to poverty have hardened over the past 30 years. A Christmas and birthday present is today considered a luxury. In 1983, it was a necessity. And adults being able to afford a 1-week holiday once a year is no longer regarded as a necessity either.
Austerity has had an effect on the views of the population on what they should be able to afford, what they should be able to have and how they should live, have been impoverished. They've been depressed by the recession.
The campaign of hate being waged by this government of rich, privileged and privately educated sociopaths against the poor, the unemployed and those who dare to try to claim the benefits to which they are entitled is unparalleled in modern history. Even Thatcher in her pomp was not as malicious in her treatment of the aforementioned demographic. This was not because she didn't wish to be more malicious than she was. It was because when she came to power, we still had trade unions capable and willing to resist such an onslaught, meaning that the cost involved in even attempting to rip up the foundations of the welfare state and the collective ethos which lies at its heart would have just been too damaging to her government and party to make worthwhile. 3 decades on, and the fruits of Thatcherism, with the corresponding neutering of the unions and other forms of working class solidarity, have culminated in a new normal of demonisation and the near criminalisation of poverty in Britain. Austerity has been sold to the country as a policy of necessity in response to years of labour profligacy and a bloated public sector. It is a lie so bold and barefaced that even Joseph Goebbels would blush while repeating it. The economic crisis, which began in the US and hit these shores in August-September of 2007, was a consequence of an out-of-control international banking and finance industry.
Dennis, you want to...
Experience of Loaves and Fishes, we're a totally voluntary group. We get no government funding whatsoever, and we're totally dependent on people's goodwill. Now, I've had a couple of stores approach me, and the food they want to offer me is bash tins and stuff that's going out of date. And when I tell them we don't use it, they look at me, you know. You don't use it? I said, well, very simply. When my wife comes into your store, she doesn't say, where's your aisle for the bash tins and where's your aisle for the out-of-date stuff? People are coming to us. Now, we're in the middle of no man's land. And we've got people coming, wee bits of children, and they're walking 3 and 4 miles. And there seems to be a fallacy going out that it's misused, it's greed. These people have their layabouts, they're rogues. They're people that's in total disarray. They're frightened, they're insecure. They've no money. We got a phone call just the other day there, for the social work department. Can you give us food for a family that they don't need to cook because they've no money for their electricity? You know, so it's, the picture that the government's painting is totally wrong picture. Yeah. People are coming here, they come to us. Last night, we were in at Redfield St Stephen's, we do a meal there. When the lads came in, he sent for a job, done 2 hours work, and even brushed the floor up when he was finished. He wasn't asked to do, but he'd done it. And the manager else came down and says to him, no, you're not suitable. And he never got a penny for his 2 hours work. That's immoral. When these things happen in this 2014, these things are immoral. For somebody to do anything, whether Labour is worthy or not, if they've went there and they've done the best that they could and they're maybe not suitable, they're still entitled to the payment that they've put in for that job. Yeah. I don't think anybody in here would be toiling away through here next week if they weren't getting paid for their day's labour the day, eh? And this is happening all the time. Yeah. The amount of people that comes to us that's sanctioned, it's unbelievable. A man that comes has been sanctioned for 11 weeks. And that's 11 weeks without any money. Oh, it's misuse, they're coming back to you. Of course they're coming back to us. If you have no money this week and you're not getting any money next week, how are you going to feed yourself? We've got a lady that hadn't eaten for 3 days because she was feeding her children. These thanks get buried under the table. They don't come to light. It's easier to say, oh, they're thieves, liars, cheats and layabouts. They misuse their benefit systems. The benefit systems are based on the national poverty line. Who are the companies that's paying below the national poverty line? Name them and shame them. Who are the companies that's not paying their inland revenue? Now, when the government brought this out, they had a meeting on a Thursday. They made a decision on the Thursday to change the benefit system. And the Tuesday, it was made law. Fact. At the same time, we're talking about looking at these companies that's not paying their proper tax. We're still looking at these people not paying their proper tax. It's the most simplest thing in the world to solve. You are the managing director of this company, we reckon you owe that tax, you've not paid it. Not to pay your tax is unlawful. If it's not paid by the end of next month, you and you's going to jail. Because that's basically what you're doing to the people that's going for benefits. You're not getting it. I don't think you're worthy of payment. That's what that's saying. What is it we're going to do with it? 2014 and people can't eat.
In other words, private greed on the part of the rich, the very constituency favoured by and so exalted by the Tories. Britain's public sector was neither bloated or out of control. On the contrary, under an economic system prone to volatility and unpredictable but periodic shocks, the public sector acts as a ballast of demand. If people are not spending, then there is no demand for the goods and services produced by businesses, which results in a reduction in economic activity, borrowing and investment, and a concomitant rise in unemployment and government debt in order to meet the cost. This is the perfect storm handed to us, courtesy of a Tory-led government, which, viewed by the credit crunch as their economic 9/11, a pretext and smokescreen behind which they have implemented the transference of wealth from the poor to the rich under the rubric of austerity. Part of this process has involved the attacks on the most economically vulnerable in society, blaming them for the recession rather than the rich, where it belongs. The question, given the severity of these attacks, is what society is going to do about it. With the next general election not until 2015, we simply cannot afford to wait. The damage that is daily being done to people's lives does not allow us this luxury. The heart-rending story of Stephanie Bottrell, a 53-year-old grandmother who took her own life back in May over the pressure she was under to find an extra £20 per week to cover the requirements of the government's bedroom tax. And this will be increasingly repeated between now and 2015 if nothing is done to stop this orchestrated campaign of state terror against people like her, deemed Untermenschen by people whose conception of society sits somewhere between Edwardian and Victorian times.
Britain is facing at least 5 more years of austerity. The country's finance minister says there's no miracle cure for the country's economy. The highly anticipated autumn statement by George Osborne brought little relief for public already angered by government cuts. For more on this story, I'm joined now live by Sarah Firth from London. Sarah, what exactly did the Chancellor say about the measures the UK public will face?
It's taking time, but the economy is healing. Those were pretty much the first words out of Chancellor George Osborne's mouth. Now, that was met to laughter in the Houses of Parliament. It's the way he tells them, isn't it? I mean, he then delivered us in this autumn statement that read as a kind of mini budget that borrowing has in fact been revised up, that debt is rising, not falling, and that Britain can settle in for more spending cuts, more cuts to welfare and austerity all the way to 2018. And despite all of that, he still tried to convince us that the government are making some progress. Now, it wasn't a particularly bright autumn statement. No one was expecting that. We were expecting this gloomy forecast for the economic future, but it was pretty tough. And of course, as we said, the Chancellor trying to sort of convince people that things are actually working, that they're pushing ahead with this similar plan that many people are saying is simply failing.
He's definitely not up to the job and hasn't been right from the outset. What he has is an ideology which is about dismantling an important welfare state and making sure that those that are on high incomes are protected.
You know, Sarah, we hear how hard people are still struggling in the UK and elsewhere in Europe, but what does this statement actually mean in real terms for the people?
Well, you know, all across Britain right now, people are going to be watching this in their homes, businesses. They're going to have been watching what the Chancellor was saying very, very closely and trying to figure out now, as we comb over the different facts and figures, exactly what that means for them in real terms. Now, in that respect, when you listen to the autumn statement, a very concerning part of that speech that George Osborne delivered was when he spoke about welfare. And really, we saw the Conservative attack on welfare continuing. And now you listen to the language and the rhetoric that was used there. He talked about fairness, but then he said fairness also needs to be about the person who leaves home in the morning and looks over to their neighbour who's asleep, living a life on benefits. I'm not sure how much George Osborne really knows about living on benefits, but I can tell you it's not much of a life. RT has spent the last couple of months investigating exactly what is going on with the UK's welfare system, and it's a miserable failure all round. The work programme figures released a week or so ago failing the people on benefits, and recently brought in a new rule for people on disability benefits who are going to perhaps be forced into unpaid work. I mean, it really smacks of back to the days of the British workhouses. And it is incredibly concerning. And, you know, I'm not pulling any punches here. The state of the welfare system in this country right now is absolutely diabolical. And in the coming years, you're going to have some horrendous stories coming out about these people, the most vulnerable in our society, suffering. And really, if you go into the detail of what George Osborne was saying today, it seems that the most vulnerable in society are going to be the ones who are in fact going to have to pay for this continued austerity. And make no mistake, they're really going to suffer. This is an austerity programme that's not even halfway through, and we still have more cuts ahead of us, more cuts to spending, more cuts to welfare, and more real-term pain for the people in this country.
The creation of the welfare state by the post-war Labour government was predicated on the need to erect a firewall between the vicissitudes of a capitalist economic system subject to periodic shocks and downturns, and those impacted most, the poor and the working class. The unemployed were held to be victims of and not responsible for the economic factors responsible for their plight. And as such, it was deemed morally just for the state to provide a safety net in order to prevent their destitution. But with the nostrums of Thatcherism sweeping away the philosophy that underpinned the post-war consensus 3 decades ago, nostrums that continue to fuel the dominant narrative politically, economically and culturally, the moral foundations of the welfare state and the social justice it represents has been subjected to an ideological assault, one that has reached its nadir under the present government. Poverty is the worst form of violence. Those in poverty have one thing in common with the rich, in that all they think about is money, about how much heating, food, and other bare essentials they can do without as they struggle to make ends meet. The idea that cutting benefits and attacking the poor could ever eradicate unemployment is beyond perverse. On the contrary, instead of eradicating unemployment, it will eradicate the unemployed, and quite literally too, as the suicide rate goes up. Indeed, this is what is so easy to forget when we listen to the benign and easy establishment speak of the political class in its depiction of the unemployed as work-shy scroungers. More austerity for those at the sharp end equates to more despair, more domestic violence, more crime, more homelessness, more mental illness, more alcoholism and drug abuse, and more hopelessness. The fate of the increasing millions who've been selected by this government of the rich, by the rich and for the rich, are to be purified with pain. It is a government that, while claiming it wishes to help those who are willing to work hard, continues with an economic policy that has and will continue to create more unemployment. The inevitable consequence is that those who refuse to be crushed under the weight of the economic and social injustice they are being subjected to will enter the black economy, while others will drift into crime. The law of cause and effect cannot be denied. As for the much vaunted recovery we've been told is taking place, this is a canard. Any economic growth that has occurred, confined to a small part of the country, and mostly in the form of inflated property prices in London, driven by overseas investors, has been in spite of austerity, not because of it. As the eminent US economist and Nobel Prize laureate Paul Krugman reminds us, economics is not a morality play. It's not a happy story in which virtue is rewarded and vice punished. In a time of deep recession, a government needs to spend more, not less, in order to fill the vacuum left by a shrinkage in private investment. You can't clear your debt unless you have sufficient income that allows you to do so. At present, we have voodoo economics based on the myth that a national economy can cut itself back to growth. They call it spending, but the correct term is investment. You need to invest in order to get a return. It really isn't difficult to grasp. Lack of understanding isn't the issue here, however. What is the issue is a malignant right-wing ideology driven by a feral hatred of the poor and ordinary working people by those who believe that to be rich and successful is to be virtuous, and to be poor, shiftless, lazy, and surplus to requirements. It is an ideology that mustn't just be defeated, but consigned to the dustbin of history, never to return.
Thank you. We've been recording the music video, and it goes like this. I'm hardcore, and I know the score, and I am disgusted by the poor, and my chums matter more because we are the law, and I've made sure we're ready for class war, taking money from the man who works long hours, giving power to the tycoon in the glass towers. That is why I can look you in the eye and say this is the party of the motherfuckers. We don't care about the mother suckers because this is the party of the motherfuckers, and no, I don't think that's a dirty word. So let the beat drop. I come here with flows right from the top. Everybody knows if you work in a shop, we won't help you. And you know what? People rising from the bottom to the top has got to stop. We have the bravery to bring back slavery. Working in a supermarket is just the start of it. My friends, there is no job at the end of it. You will be working for your benefits forever. Let me get this off my chest, saying, yes, we are selling the NHS and we'll give you less. And that is just for starters. Even after privatising, sticking plasters, it is a social disaster that makes our hearts beat faster. Now, I am your master. The last thing this country needs is us, the Conservatives, worse than the alternative. We don't care if you're driven to despair. Don't you dare say it's not fair. I'm not saying it's not funny. It is for me. I've got loads of money. This is the party of the motherfuckers the country is run. For me and my mothers, this is the party of the motherfuckers who just don't care about the mother suckers